but we were leaving the wedding because we had like so much fun, and we were like walking to the car, and it's like drizzling, and I put like my suit jacket around her, and we're walking, and she's like, if there was any moment that would be perfect for you to propose, it'd be right now. And I didn't have the ring on me because I didn't plan on proposing after a wedding.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'll be right back. I made coffee. I'm gonna grab that coffee.
Yes, please. I wish I was there to get coffee from you. Welcome back to the Christ and Culture. This is Steve.
And this is Gordon. And today we are joined by a special guest, Phil Kosloski. Is that correct? Is how you say it, right?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, and he works with, I'm not sure, you can let us know kind of like how it came to be, but Voyage Comics and Publishing. So yeah, just before we kind of jump into that though, tell us about like who you are.
Yeah, so my name is Phil Kosloski. I live in central Wisconsin, and I had worked for about 6 years in parish ministry in a adult faith formation program. And then about that time, I got a master's in theology through the Augustine Institute, and kind of through that, I felt kind of a call to kind of consider my own gifts and talents and how I can better, the gospel and so initially I began writing primarily spirituality articles through a website known as Aleteia, and I've been writing for them for the past 3 years, and then in the past year or so, I kind of am branching out and started exploring the world of comic books and started to write comic books, and then kind of founded my own company called Voyage Comics and Publishing. And in the past year, we've published at least one comic book called Finnian and the Seven Mountains, and then in the next couple of months, we have a few that will be published. One of them is going to be a kind of a continuation in that series, and then another one is based on the life of Saint Joan of Arc. And kind of my goal is to create comic books and stories that are entertaining, but also inspiring. So, something that a wide variety of people can pick up and enjoy, that's kind of rooted in the Catholic faith, but not necessarily, I guess, like a sermon or a homily.
Right. I didn't realize that you said Aleteia. I just think I pulled that up. So how did you get into like writing? Because I know on Voyage Comics you guys have like a blog aspect too that seems, until I think a few things probably come out, to be the most active aside from the Finnian comics. So how'd you get into writing blogs and stuff?
Sure. Well, I mean, for several years I kind of started my own personal blog, and it was more or less the fruit of kind of discerning in my own life kind of my gifts and talents, and so I started just blogging mainly about prayer and spirituality on my own website, and then through that and sharing it on social media, I was initially, was contacted by the National Catholic Register, and I started blogging them for a little bit, and then kind of as my other articles were being shared, then I was contacted by Aleteia, and then started writing for them more or less full time for the past 3 years.
Okay.
So I mean, I've been writing for maybe 5 or 6 years, and then for Aleteia mainly for the past 3 years.
Gotcha. And then you said you started to get into comics. By that, did you mean like reading them?
No, I was just kind of one of the main like dreams of a writer is to kind of like write a good novel or something.
Right.
And it's kind of funny. I tried to start writing kind of like short stories and kind of a fictional story, and it really just didn't work. I realized it just wasn't I wasn't good at it, to be honest, which is kind of funny. But anyway, and then I just kind of, I kind of had this inspiration to, like, for me, I'm very visual and I love art and artistic expression, and I think you can communicate a lot through artwork. And so I was just kind of, thinking and praying about this, and then I just kind of thought, well, maybe, I think comic books would be a great way to present an entertaining story, to kind of evangelize the faith. And so I kind of, just started. I began, kind of research a little bit, because I've been familiar with comics throughout my life, but I've never really looked into like how it actually is produced.
Yeah.
So I started that, and really, I guess I could see, God's providence through it, because shortly after I kind of announced my intention on my blog, I was contacted by one of my readers who knew an artist who had been doing artwork for Marvel and DC Comics for the past 30 years.
Wow.
And then I was also contacted separately by another artist who had been he'd been an animator with Disney, and so that kind of was a confirmation for me that I was kind of moving in the right direction. And kind of through those contacts, then I've been in touch with other very talented artists and other writers who have kind of helped me kind of perfect comic book writing, and I've found that it's something that I'm actually good at, and it actually comes pretty easily. So
That's incredible. Steve, just interject if you have any questions. I'm going to keep going.
Yeah,
But
yeah, no, great.
what was it? Oh, have you noticed? Maybe not, but like I'm thinking, even one as a writer, if like that's something people knew you're going to do, like kind of going from short stories or something to comic books. Maybe there was some backlash there. I don't know. Some people view comics. I know like one time I had like an ex when I started really getting into comics who thought that was childish and I should like read more of other books. But also I'm thinking like, there was that phase I don't think back in like the 60s or something where people thought like comic books were violent, and then they had like that ban. Same with like D&D and stuff. And so it's like trying to use that as like an evangelization approach. Have you noticed any like issues kind of starting this process up, is I guess what I'm asking, if that makes sense?
Yeah, comic books are definitely not something that is on the radar of most Christians or most Catholics, and definitely not for Catholic publishers, and yeah, it's kind of viewed in kind of a lesser format, if something that's popular, kind of like kind of like a trend, and so it's not, it doesn't have that association, that kind of enduring association that like novels have.
Yeah.
For the most part, I guess what's been helping really is that because of these comic book movies that have been so successful and popular, that's kind of changing, I guess, people's views of
That's true.
of comic books. And I have families, a lot of parents who their children, they really love comic books, and so yeah. What I find is this is kind of a healthy alternative, something that you can give your kids that's not offensive, because I've also, the comic book world is pretty big, and most of it is, the artwork is very, very bad, and in a sense of, it's the artwork is done well, but it's morally bad, and just, because it's a product of the culture, it follows what's in the culture, and that's been problematic in recent years. Just how kind of all the major companies are trying to move along with those
Right.
trends.
Right.
Yeah. I think it's interesting too. You talk about like in the 60s, people would mention how violent, I guess, comics were, but they've definitely gotten, I feel, a lot more graphic, is kind of, I think, what you're getting at, Phil.
Yeah.
In recent years, and I think that's just kind of in an attempt to market toward people that aren't just kids. And you kind of see that a little bit, obviously, like with all of the Marvel movies and everything, that's kind of becoming more popular in the overarching culture. So I think it's a good thing that you're presenting sort of an alternative to that. And so, yeah, that's just my small take.
I also like that you, like, as far as this approach, you're not wanting to, like, just create it. You want, like, good value in, like, the illustration and the writing. And so, like, because you're like, well, I've seen this one, and no offense, like, I appreciate it, but it's like, that's not kind of good. And so it's, like, really, really cool, too. Yeah, could you explain, I don't want you to, like, obviously spoil anything that's coming out, but could you explain kind of the Finnian story that's out right now?
Sure. Yeah, so the first story that I developed is called Finnian and the Seven Mountains, and it was kind of born after watching Star Wars The Force Awakens.
Nice.
And essentially, kind of that final scene, and then along with, the Jedi, they're on this island. And I was fascinated by it because it's a real island off the coast of Ireland, and it just has all those just, I don't know, qualities of kind of like an innate spirituality to it, but then just kind of this ancient feel to it, and so I kind of took that and then decided to go and look at the monks who lived there. They lived on that island for a couple hundred years. And then kind of connected to this island, there's kind of this legend of, it's called the Sword of St. Michael. And basically there's all these monasteries that are located on these islands or mountains. They start off the coast of Ireland and then they end in Jerusalem. And there's just like, it's like this perfect line. And so I just kind of saw this as just kind of a, I don't know, perfect opportunity to kind of explore this legend and to kind of to bring it to life in a fun and entertaining way. And so the first of the series, begins on that first island, and then and basically each issue after that kind of follows that line and the adventures that they have along the way.
That's awesome. Okay. Do you think so what this podcast is, it's called The Christ in Culture, and we usually talk about maybe like it's a Marvel movie, maybe like we've done The Shape of Water, maybe it's a song, and we just take like kind of secular media and pull out like Christian themes kind of that's found in it. And so I was wondering if like before kind of like Voyage Comics was like really a thing, maybe it was still an idea. Did you think there was like Christian themes in some of the other comic books that you read?
Certainly. Yeah, I mean, throughout, any type of superhero story.
Right.
Yeah, it's, there's so many of them, but, really they're based on this kind of this human desire, well, in one sense, like a Messiah, like who will save us. That just seems kind of like in a human need. And, one way that's expressed, is these superheroes who they save Earth from all these calamities, and, many of them, they sacrifice their lives. And so, a lot of these superheroes are kind of images of Jesus Christ, and, depending on the superhero, you can see that better expressed or than others.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, that's definitely kind of just a common thing that runs throughout, and then also just the need for heroes to look up to, and yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, superheroes, they're very similar to Catholic saints, just from the fact that these people, a lot of superheroes, kind of depend. Well, I guess both in Marvel and DC, they're superheroes who are ordinary people. I guess
right.
Spider-Man's probably the most common example of just an ordinary teenager who is transformed into something else, but then he uses that power, and and so Catholic saints are very similar in that respect, where they started out very ordinary, but then we were just, given extraordinary graces by God, and we're able to really gifts, the greater good of humanity.
Yeah. As because I know you said I saw that you also have like a Kickstarter for it with the Joan of Arc one coming out. Are saints a possibility for like something you want to focus on, or like, I guess what's other ideas you have like for this? Because right now I kind of saw some of the artwork for the Joan of Arc when I was checking that out, and then the Finnian, it seems very like Tolkien style storytelling and like plays. Well, I guess Joan of Arc's more later on, but
yeah,
would you have, I don't know, like space future type ideas too, or what? Or is it just like whatever comes along?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I've definitely these first two series are definitely more, it's a mix of history and fantasy, and yeah, I mean, a big influence for me is certainly Tolkien and his use of storytelling. But yeah, I mean, in the future, I do want to kind of branch out and, look at, creating different things that are using different in comic books, like, possibly developing new superheroes or even like
Okay, that'd be cool.
A space adventure of some kind. But yeah, I mean, the trouble is for those types of things, you have to think of something that's unique and that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because, one thing I always try to, what I hope for is to create quality stories that aren't just kind of vehicles to get across a certain message, but that are just good stories that you can enjoy.
That makes sense, yeah. Is this like something you're doing full time?
I mean...
are you pouring everything into this, or is there...
Well, I mean, it's one of those side projects that, I spend a good deal amount of time on it, but, I've been lucky enough to be in contact with some very talented artists, and so, yeah, so, I mean, it's been good. I can only move so fast at this point, but yeah, I mean, I'm hoping in the next few months that, yeah, I mean, there's some things behind that hopefully will move it along a little bit faster.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, I don't know the process, but I imagine it's a tedious one. One thing I appreciate about comic books over kind of like novels and things is like I know there's many hands that go into a novel, but sometimes it could be like a writer and then a publisher, whereas you have like an illustrator and maybe a writer, maybe like, and then there's the storyboards, and yeah, I just appreciate like that process a lot. So that's really cool. And like the fact, because I prefer DC over Marvel, but the fact that like there's like famous illustrators and famous like creators and writers, and you can just get famous on like your illustrations, and that's incredible. Okay, so I'll do like a kind of a turn a little bit, segueing into like I just talked about DC. Let's just go into comic books real quick. What comic books do you like? What's your favorite superheroes? Fun stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess, growing up, I definitely was more attracted to many of the more Marvel characters. I mean, I really enjoyed the X-Men were probably a big, I don't know, I guess I like the concept, and, probably what's attractive about the X-Men is when you're reading it as a kid, a lot of these superheroes are, kind of teenagers, starting in this, school for the gifted.
Right.
And then in the same way, kind of Spider-Man is kind of another one that I've enjoyed. And yeah, I mean, I think as I've read more with, about Captain America is probably one of the superheroes I've enjoyed, and I like portrayed him in all the movies they've done recently. Just this man out of time that kind of stands for these traditional values that have kind of gone by the wayside in modern society.
Yeah, you brought up X-Men, and I was thinking about how you mentioned earlier, like comic books being kind of a good metaphor, I guess, but like a way to like look at the saints and just like ordinary people. And I the one thing I always loved about X-Men was like the fact that they're so outcasted, opposed to like other superheroes who like people are like, yeah, get Spider-Man, or put the bat symbol on. The mutant gene was looked down upon, and people did not like the X-Men throughout that comics, and yet still the X-Men fought to save like humanity and these people that are themselves, as well as the people that didn't want them to exist.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, it's very true in terms of just thinking about the saints and especially the martyrs who they were persecuted throughout, Christians being persecuted throughout history, but yet these saints loved humanity and wanted to save it from its errors, but then the rest of society just does not understand, and ends up similar to the X-Men, how they kind of in a certain sense to save humanity, but then are also slowly eradicated or trying to be eradicated by other people.
Yeah,
right. Well, and that's something that I think that comics tend to be sort of a lot of modern day myth, a lot of modern day mythos. And so one of the things I think is interesting with comics, and kind of to segue a little bit, and you kind of see it like especially in Infinity War and Endgame, is the way they kind of handle their villains are a way that can really show evil, or handle sort of evil mindset in a villain, especially now, like modern days, where it's not just I'm bad because I'm bad, but they have their own backstory in a way that kind of does something that in old myths kind of forewarned you against certain things. You kind of see that, I think, in modern stories and especially comics. For instance, the idea we mentioned in Infinity War with consequentialism, this whole idea of the ends justify the means, or sort of this utilitarian idea. And one of the things that I thought was interesting in Endgame is that, a lot of people after Infinity War, they kind of were like, well, was Thanos really that bad? And then you see in Endgame where he's just like, all right, well, we'll just wipe everyone out. And I think that's sort of the natural end of consequentialism. When you justify murder in some cases, then it sort of leads itself to murder in more cases, and it becomes this judgment call where Thanos becomes the one who gets to decide who lives or dies, and then he just sets the standard that, well, no one's worth living because they're ungrateful for the gift of death that I've given them, And so I just am interested to kind of hear your thoughts on sort of just comics as they handle some of these heavier themes in a way that kind of acts as a modern myth, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I don't know, it is interesting just how, that's more of a kind of a black and white, like, this is, I guess this is, you could say this is of God and this is of the devil, and there's no, there's no middle ground.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as storytelling has progressed, then these, characters have become, I guess you could say, more human, even if they're not actually human. Where they, they're definitely bad guys, but they're bad guys for a reason, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And and I found it interesting just how with how these different studios have decided to take villains from the comic books too, and then to give them their own movie, which I've been interested in. Like, I didn't see the movie, but like Venom is probably one of the most recent cases, or even kind of Deadpool too is also one of those where it's where they in a certain sense there's these bad guys, but they're kind of doing good, but they're not it's they yeah, I mean, it's kind of this belief that, they think they're just doing bad to either prevent more bad from happening, which, yeah, it just kind of gets things a little more grayer. But you do need to have that kind of balancing of this. There is an ultimate good, and you can't do bad to achieve that good. I don't know. In some ways, like in Endgame, they've, I mean, in a certain sense, in some of these Marvel movies, you kind of see how, good characters kind of struggling with this concept of, how far do we go to protect the world? And yeah, I mean, it's interesting then how, in a certain sense, there's characters are willing to, sacrifice their own lives, but then they do end up using the tool that destroyed everyone to kind of destroy the enemy. So,
right,
which is, I don't know. It's interesting to think about kind of the whole. I guess if you can think about the Tolkien and the One Ring, where you have, they go on this quest to destroy the ring, but then there's all these people along the way who want to use it. Saying that if they possess the ring, they will do good, but that ends up, corrupting them in the end. And so I don't know. It's when it's that whole allure of power, either the power to do good or the power to do bad. So I don't know. Yeah, that's kind of
kind of like what you said, and then was going off what Steve said too about like villains. And you said after you kind of posed this question, like it's kind of black and white, but they've kind of made it to where it becomes grayer. Because I'm kind of in like parish ministry right now, and most of my teens like love Loki. Like he's like an adored character, and I tell them all the time, I was like, okay, well, he's bad, right? Like he's a villain. And they're like, no, but he tries to do good. And I was like, no, he doesn't. Like everything he's ever done was selfish. It's like it's just to save himself. And I also like think of Batman, who's like my favorite comic book, anything. And you have like the Joker versus other villains, where when you know their backstory and how they're created, people can sympathize with these villains, like Mr. Freeze, for example. And they want to like feel bad and like, oh, if only this was different, he wouldn't be a villain. Whereas with the Joker, even the villains in the comic books like think the Joker is crazy or like fear the Joker. And he's just pure evil, and we don't know necessarily where he came from. And I think they kind of did that with Thanos, where like we didn't see how that villain, like other villains leading up to this, was created. We just had seen him in like end credits and just his intention to ruin the world. And then the snap happened, and just ultimately everyone's like, okay, I hate Thanos. Thanos needs to die.
Yeah.
And so I think there is this like black and white, but the gray kind of comes when we want to sympathize and like we want to fix people or like think like there's still good in them, like kind of like Batman does, where he doesn't like kill any of his villains. He just kind of like puts them in an asylum. Like you can change. But I don't know. I don't know if there's like a danger to wanting to sympathize with villains, or like you said, you brought up Deadpool, who is a hero sort of, but he definitely kills people, and he doesn't really, you don't want to act like Deadpool in the way you present yourself or talk or anything, but he is kind of a good guy. Yeah. So there's really nothing to that, but yeah, just like an interesting thing where villains can be people we want. We kind of, I don't know if there's even a connection. Do you think people can like feel connection to villains we sympathize with?
I mean, in a certain sense, I guess there's two ways to look at it. Like in one way, when humanizing these villains, it can kind of make you feel better about yourself. Where you're like, okay, well, I guess I'm not that bad, and and kind of confirms you, and maybe if you maybe don't always make the right decision, like, well, then it's I guess comforting to know that other people struggle with that.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, in another sense, I guess you could look at it where, yeah, I mean, it's a tough line to be on, because from the Catholic perspective, it is true that, while we do make wrong choices, we do have the mercy of God, and we can change. So, in that sense, it's true. I mean, it's, there are, people who choose bad choices in the world. We do that, but we can change. So, but then, I guess you could say a third way to look at it is, well, you have these characters, and when it comes to us wanting to, idolize people or idolize characters, it can be harmful, because we might want to become, like Deadpool or some character like that, where, we think we're doing good, but we're actually not.
Yeah. So we kind of do this thing usually in the beginning, but we'll kind of do it here in the end, where we say kind of media we've been intaking lately, whether it's new music or whatever. But yeah, we'll kind of end with this, mostly because Endgame is, I think, something we've all seen more recently. We can do kind of how we feel on that. But Steve, have you been intaking any new media lately?
Not since last episode, really. Definitely just, like I said, I recently watched Endgame, just watching a couple of those Netflix shows that I mentioned last time around. But yeah, for the most part, and then like I said, I've actually just been reading. I actually am started. The only thing that's kind of new is the book that Clint's girlfriend gave us, The Culture War. I've been sort of reading that, or just getting started in that. So that's been good. It's kind of up my alley in terms of a lot of the things that I've talked about on the podcast before. So
nice. I have kind of rewatched most of the Marvel movies because someone I live with had not seen any of them and wanted to watch Endgame, so she started from the beginning and went through. So I kind of watched some of them here and there with her. I also have been reading. I read. It's called Jesus of Nazareth by Pope Benedict. I read that during Holy Week leading up to Easter. And then as well, Avengers Endgame. There's been a lot of new music that has come out. I like, once a new album comes out of kind of anything, I kind of like want to check it out, but that list would be too long. But Phil, is there anything you've been intaking at any point that's new to you?
Sure. I mean, besides Avengers Endgame, I was able to watch a pre-screening of the Tolkien movie, which comes out today in theaters, and yeah, I mean it's an interesting take on Tolkien, but it's really, in the end, it's just kind of a snapshot. So yeah, it's one of those things where if you don't know much about him, you probably would like it. If you know a lot about him, it kind of leaves you wishing that there was more.
Yeah, Clint, our other host, he's more of the inkling among the three of us, and he went and saw it last night because I know he wants to do a podcast on it. And I asked him how he thought it went, and he kind of said the same thing, where he's like, it was okay. He's like, there's like really small details, like his wife, throwing sugar cubes, which I know she kind of really did, and that was like a nice nod. And then there's other details where you're like, what? That doesn't happen. So, but that's kind of the feeling I got from the trailer, where I don't know much about him, his life, but like it just seemed like they were turning that story just focused on him and his wife and like the love story. And I was like, that's not really what I want to know about him. I want to know about like where he got all these ideas and all this other stuff, and him hanging out with C.S. Lewis. But yeah. How'd you like Endgame?
Yeah, I mean, I really.
Well, my biggest question for anybody, I don't know if I've asked Steve this, but how'd you like Thor?
Yeah, I mean, going into it, I really didn't have any expectations, and I really enjoyed the humor aspects of the movie. Yeah, I mean, it was just really fun. I did like how they ended it. It kind of was very fitting for fitting conclusion to all these movies recently.
Yeah. Steve, you have anything?
I think that's it on media.
You have anything else? Just do you want to?
Yeah,
Otherwise,
no,
we can.
Yeah, no, we can just probably move into either shout outs or a challenge.
Oh yeah, thanks for reminding me. I totally forgot about that. So Phil, no pressure here. Something else we kind of do at the end of like an episode is kind of based on the conversation we've been having, challenge our listeners for the week. So I don't know if you have anything. Otherwise, I kind of think I do. Do you have anything that you think of that you might want? Like it could be like a small, whether it's prayerful or anything, kind of a challenge based on the conversation.
I guess nothing immediately comes to mind. So
that's okay. I was thinking kind of more at the end where we're talking about villains and saints and kind of like the characters that are portrayed in comic books that kind of our listeners could reflect this week, whether they want to go watch a movie or what, but kind of reflect on who the characters are, especially if you think about the Marvel movies, if that's like easier for people that they don't really read comic books, but they watch them, like realizing that Iron Man is Tony Stark and realizing that they're just regular people, and then kind of think about and pray with maybe the saints, whether they want to pick a saint or if you want to if you have a favorite saint, kind of find that and kind of realize that like, you know, don't take away the saint title necessarily, but realize that it's just a regular person too. So having yourself reflect on that this week and just realize like you easily are that same ordinary person. Cool. Okay. I'm just going to shout out Sarah because honestly, I had not heard about Voyage Comics, and she's the one that like kind of shot us a text like, hey, you guys should check this out. They're doing like the Catholic thing or the Christian thing that you guys are into. And I was like, cool. And then I want to shout out Gina because I was just home in Georgia. That's where I'm from originally. And she's just someone I knew from church that I didn't know listened to this podcast. And she was like, hey, I've been listening. So shout out to both of them. And then Phil, just to end this, where can people find you?
Just really quickly before that, sorry, I actually do have a shout out. I wanted to shout out that Ty, who is one of our new patrons.
Yeah.
Thank
you.
Sorry, Phil. Go ahead.
No problem. Yeah. So yeah, if you want to learn more, it's just voyagecomics.com. And recently, this past week, our Joan of Arc Kickstarter actually ended, but it was successful. So you can still pre-order that comic book on our website.
Nice.
And otherwise, aleteia.org. You can kind of sign articles there.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for taking your time to do this. And I really appreciate what you're doing. I haven't had the chance to like get a copy of like Finnian or anything, but I really look forward to a lot of the comic books that are coming out, and I do want to read that. So thank you once again for just taking your time to be on this podcast, as well as just doing what you're doing, because I think it's awesome, and mostly because I'm obsessed with comic books. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. Have a good day. And thank you again. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you guys for listening to this episode. It was awesome to have Phil on, and I hope you guys enjoyed that conversation. Me and Steve have a lot we want to say opposed to Endgame, and we're not afraid to spoil it. Probably in the bottom details, we've probably put there's spoilers in this episode already. Phil might have mentioned some things, but yeah, Endgame hot takes. Steve, go.
Yeah, so I thought it was really interesting. So Tony Stark's character, I think a lot of people were mad at his death or upset about it, which I understand, but In terms of his character arc, I thought this was the best sort of way for him to go. From Age of Ultron, his biggest fear was that dream, sort of that prophetic dream that he had, that he survived and everyone else died and he had no way to stop them. That's kind of what started. That's where Age of Ultron, that's where he built Ultron, and Civil War, that's why the Sokovia Accords existed. And so when I see his character arc, the ability for him to be able to bring everybody back and sort of, in a very Christ-like way, sacrifice himself for others, I thought was kind of the perfect send-off to the way that his character had been built over the past several movies. What do you think about that?
I loved it.
Yeah.
Because I expected it. I called it. It's what I wanted to happen. Also, I think as far as like what we do on the show, I kind of used Iron Man in my talk with the teens yesterday or 2 days ago in a conversation or like a talk I was doing where since Iron Man 3, did that come out before Ultron? It did, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Since Iron Man 3, you know, that's kind of when him and Pepper were like a thing now. Like Pepper was no longer... Secretary? I'll edit that out. Yeah, she served him, and now they're like together. He wanted to stop being Iron Man. Like he's had this, he's been wrestling with like, I want to just be Tony, and I just want to be with you. And we see that in Endgame, in like the majority of the movie, or the beginning, you know. And so I kind of, you know, put it for the kids like Iron Man is what like. When we wrestle with our identity and who we are, or just in culture, people like wrestling with like what a person is, it's Tony Stark, not Iron Man. So Iron Man is this other thing that someone wrestles with. And he was restless, you know? And so he wrestled with it so much. I mean, there was good that he was doing with being Iron Man. It was a suit of armor. But he wrestled it so much, it ended up killing him.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, there's something to that. But I loved it, and I'm really happy. And just the whole idea that, like I said, he didn't want to be Iron Man, but he couldn't sleep if he wasn't, and he had to be Iron Man to the end.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I think that his character really develops when his daughter is born. In a lot of ways too, where, you know, when he finally signs on to be like, all right, let's go try to fix this. Let's try to bring back all those who've died. He even mentions like, that's my non-negotiable. Like my daughter, like whatever we do, if we change the path, like whatever it is that happens, like I'm not giving up my daughter. You know, like she has to exist. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was really unique. Kind of to go more into also the Thanos consequentialism, because I kind of briefly mentioned on it, but I really did think that was the fulfillment, because, you know, he was even willing to bombard his own people and kind of even wipe out his own army to achieve what he wanted to achieve. Which,
like when he was dropping the bombs from the sky?
Yeah, he wanted to like drop the bombs on his own army until Captain Marvel came in and wrecked his ship. But he was willing to kill everyone, including his own men. And I think once you start to accept, you know, as a culture, we see it. Once you start to accept that some people deserve to die, then that very quickly becomes to them, well, no one really truly deserves to live. And then it becomes our judgment call. And so when you have power, when, you know, the strongest, you know, and you saw it in Nazi Germany, you saw it with Thanos, is, well, I get to decide who lives or dies, and I have the power to decide that. And you see that Thanos has gone to the point where he's like, well, no one's deserving because, look, I wiped out half of you and I left half of you to live, and you're ungrateful. And it's, you know, it's this slippery slope that, you know, I think for the culture was so enchanting with Thanos in Infinity War is that he believed in this sort of consequentialism idea that we already believe in, you know, in a society that accepts abortion and euthanasia in ways that we do. Thanos of the Infinity War kind of fits in with what's already been accepted by a lot of the culture, but people haven't accepted the Thanos of Endgame. because the Thanos of Endgame is the scary realization that it's the same Thanos as Infinity War. He's just no longer making these like arbitrary distinctions. Like he's following through on his ethic. And I think that that's really powerful. And I think it's a great warning sign. And that's what I was trying to get into with Phil, is that it really shows us like the horror, or the kind of warns us against that train of thought. That's something I forgot to mention in the Infinity War podcast, but I thought was such a great line, was when Captain America says, "We don't trade lives." And I think like that's kind of more important, that, you know, what you end up losing, and I thought what Endgame really showed, when you end up losing with consequentialism or this utilitarian idea, is the individual, is actual individuals, or any sort of care for individuals, because you have to make a decision of, okay, well, what individual life is more important, instead of being like all life is important, and let's figure that out. Anyway, so that's my hot take.
No, I agree, because I know you kind of like, you view Thanos in light of the culture of death. And I think it could be with any sin, but like when we specifically look at like abortion right now, the fact that it's like, okay, you can abort a child after this long, and then, you know, there's this debate between people where it's like, well, I want more, versus people are like, well, that shouldn't even exist at all. And that's that scene where Thanos is like, you know, I left half of you, and all you've been doing since then is just worrying about how to get the other half back rather than just living. And so I'm going to take away all of you. And so it's like this, you know, you can do it after so long. And people are like, no, but I want more. And so now we see like in some states you can do it like at birth. And then like, yeah, what's like you said, like what's next? It's scary to see the Thanos of Endgame, because it's like, what is the end game of these terrible things?
Yeah, and it's so interesting, you know, to see some of these modern ethicists, for instance, like Peter Singer or Margaret Sanger, who started Planned Parenthood, and sort of like their idea of ethics, right? Peter Singer is sort of the modern ethicist that a lot of people follow, that talks about, he's kind of the big proponent of there are human persons and then human non-persons, and he makes that distinction. And that's like the distinction that a lot of people sort of end up following, especially in like a post-relativistic society. But it's so funny to like, not funny, but like almost scary, but ironic to read that no one has ever accepted that, like until modern sort of America, and sort of modern thing, nobody ever argued for the sort of things that they argued, except for Nazi Germany. And so it's just weird to see that as the thing that people want to accept, knowing full well where it ultimately leads. Just, you know, the idea of these judgment calls. But I don't want to spend too much time on that topic, because I think we're just beating a dead horse. But, yeah. What about Captain? So I thought Captain America was great in this movie too. What do you think about worthy Captain America in light of Civil War?
In light of Civil War, that's an interesting question. So I think, so it's funny because Iron Man is my favorite of the MCU, and so I've always been Team Iron Man, even during Civil War. However, me and Lizzie have had this conversation where it's like, what made Captain America worthy? And I think it is Civil War. Like Civil War, and the movies afterwards is what caused him to be worthy, because in Age of Ultron you see everybody trying, and we see he has the strength to lift it, but still not necessarily the worth. And then in Civil War is when there's this pivotal like moment where you have to make a decision, and he still stays true to himself and this cause and everything to the end. And I think that's what makes him worthy, and I think it makes perfect sense. There's also go ahead.
No, go ahead. What were you going to say?
So there's also a theory someone told me, it might have been Lizzie, where like maybe he wasn't able to lift it before because they were just trying to lift it for fun rather than like a need and a worth to lift it in the end.
Yeah, he was able to almost, like, he budged it barely.
Right.
And I think there was, like, something, because he is, like, a very worthy kind of guy in terms of, like, he is such a moral person. But yeah, no, the reason I asked it the way I asked is kind of in that exactly how you answered it. It was a very leading question on my part. But that's what I was kind of hoping you'd get at, was I thought I was very team Captain America in Civil War, just in regards to the fact that the whole, Sokovia Accords because what I thought was interesting with Civil War, and I'll kind of take this and it'll be a little bit of an offshoot, but I think kind of goes into it. What was interesting about Civil War is it was this sort of like intervention of a bunch of governments to say, okay, well, these are things that you as a superhero have to follow, that there's some sort of accountability for you. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But what I think was an interesting sort of take is that it ended up sort of trampling individuals in a lot of ways, specifically Bucky Barnes or the Winter Soldier, where it's like, well, he has to be brought in because he's a criminal or he's done these things. And Steve knew that trusted his friend, like trusted that this wasn't true. It was almost like a guilty until proven innocent scenario. And Captain America, like you said, stayed true and really defended a man that had no allies if it weren't for Cap, Yeah. And he eventually stopped this sort of like trumping of an individual's right just because of sort of the mass hysteria or this trickery or this deception. And I felt like that was the moment where he was willing to give up everything to really save somebody and to be truly just and to do the right thing even though no one else agreed with him. It was just this whole idea of, kind of, to quote Fulton Sheen, right is right, even if everyone else disagrees with it, and wrong is wrong, even if everyone agrees with it. Kind of to paraphrase that.
I also think, I didn't think about this until just now, but I also think another thing that plays into Captain America's like ability to wield the hammer is Thor's situation.
Yeah.
Like, Thor was not unworthy in the movie, but he kind of, since Ultron, had hope that Captain America could do this thing, because you hear in the movie he's like, I knew it. Like, he was really excited.
Yeah.
And in this movie, I think Thor really needed someone else to also be able to wield. Like, he was in such despair, and he was in such anger, and he was in such like a place where he felt like he shouldn't be worthy, that he was almost willing to pass that torch. And when it happened, it just like, you could tell he was a different person and more willing to like fight alongside Cap in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too, is, Thor's character, I mean, it's gotten a lot more comedic, but Thor's character has always been one of great sort of justice. He's always been a truly sort of just character. And I think that of the other characters, Captain America is the other truly just one, Yeah. That both of them have noble presence that, I think that Tony really wants to do the right thing, and I think he's great. And trust me, I love Tony Stark, but I think that Tony's much more pragmatic, whereas Thor and Captain America are sort of these ideal, sort of noble supermen,
Cool. Well, anything else? Otherwise, probably need to wrap it up.
Yeah, we'll probably wrap it up if we need to if there's anything else. But I think those are sort of the main themes. There was a lot of themes in that movie. Yeah. We could go all day and have another 2 podcasts on this, but we'll spare you. Just go watch the movie. And actually, I think it would be an interesting sub-challenge to have you guys reach out to us with different themes that you caught in the movie.
Yeah.
Instead of just us sort of talking about it to you. We'd love to hear what you guys saw, because we're just touching on a couple big themes that we saw. But there are a lot more.
It goes in. It's the finalization of like everyone's story. And so each character line has its own theme, as well as the overarching story. So
Yeah. So actually, yeah, I would be interested to hear what all of you as the listeners have to say about it. And so kind of to wrap up, again, please check us out on our website, thechristandculture.com. You can find us on social media, which is below in the description.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, we would love to hear from y'all. And if you guys like what you hear here, we would really encourage you, like our new patron, Ty.
Yes, thank you, Ty.
To consider supporting us on Patreon. Can't speak. To consider supporting us on Patreon.
You'll get rewards for different tiers for like $10 a month, like Kenzie and Ty. You'll get a sticker. You'll get prayerful reflections monthly. You'll get a phone call from one of us. There's more rewards as you go up. We also have mentioned on previous podcasts that the first 5 patrons will get their own episode of where we will record a topic of their choice and send it just to them. It won't be published. No one else can hear it. It's for you. So Ty will be getting that. Kenzie's already in the works with that. So there's 3 more.
Yeah.
And we don't make money off of this. It's just right now, if we got 2 more patrons, we would break even with the cost we've put into this podcast, and then the patrons on top of that, we would just be able to buy better equipment and just make this episode the best version of itself for you guys. None of it goes into our own pocket. Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, or like Gordon said, this is something that we've kind of put a lot of money into up front. So this helps recover some of those costs, as none of us are particularly wealthy individuals. And also this helps to be able to get better equipment so that we do have better quality recordings, especially as we're bringing on more and more special guests like we did today, and they're calling in, that we actually have the ability to have quality sound recordings for them so that we can give a better product to you guys and that you guys can kind of listen and get kind of swept up in it and hopefully feel like you're a part of the conversation without technical difficulties aside. Cool. Anything else? That's it. Thanks, guys, for joining us on the adventure. See you next time.